Many media outlets have reported that the Reds are done spending money on free agents this year, but not so fast. Ken Rosenthal is reporting that the Reds are still in on an old friend for 2023. In 2022, the Reds bullpen was a hot mess. That's the best description we can come up with for it. We're going to tell you how confident we are in the arms that remain in the bullpen for 2023. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On Reds. Let's go.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Reds with myself, Jeff Carr, and my co-host, Stephen Offenbaker. Thank you so much for joining us here as we are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans, bringing you the Locked On Reds podcast that's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We have turned a lifelong fandom, really an addiction to the Cincinnati Reds, into information for you. And thanks as always for making Locked On Reds your first listen. We're free and available on all platforms. On today's podcast, we are going to dive into some new rumors surrounding an old friend coming back to Cincinnati. We're also going to take a look at the bullpen, something that we always have problems with, it seems like here, at least in recent years. What kind of confidence level do we have on the guys that are currently on the roster? We'll dive into that. Plus, are we worried about another familiar face being in a different place in division? We'll get into that coming up here a little later on. But Steve, I want to start first with the report that we saw from the esteemed Ken Rosenthal that says Johnny Cueto has narrowed his teams down to 3. Cincinnati is one of those 3.
That's right. Ken Rosenthal reported yesterday that Johnny Cueto is in talks basically with the Padres, the Miami Marlins, and that the Reds are still interested. So, I take this kind of with a grain of salt, Jeff, but I believe if Ken Rosenthal reported it, someone told him that. Someone told him the Reds are in. Typically, though, we don't see the Reds share that kind of information. So I suspect that it was probably someone involved in the talks on Johnny Cueto's side, his agent, somebody that works for his agent. It's probably a bidding war right now between Miami and San Diego, and they dropped in that third team just to kind of fuel the negotiations a little bit. Right. That being said, I still have said all along that Johnny Cueto makes so much sense for the Reds to sign because he would be relatively inexpensive in baseball terms. He still has some baseball left in his arm. It would be a name that the casual fans would recognize and get excited about. And right. It actually fills a need, which is the 4th spot in the rotation heading into the 2023 season.
Yeah, let's separate 2 things right now. Firstly, you and I are going to be absolutely stoked if this happens. I mean, absolutely excited. And I love the fact that the Reds are still in on this. Like you said, though, to what extent? What are we talking about here? And honestly, I think that, yes, while the fan part of me is super excited about this, the guy that watches this team every day, the guy that keeps up with this team every day, thinks it would be a huge surprise if the Reds pull it off, especially from the quote that Nick Krall had, that whenever he was asked after Will Myers was signed whether or not the Reds would be in on any more free agents, he said the words, "We'd have to get creative" when it comes to the money that it would take and stuff like that. So yes, Johnny Cueto would fit amazing on this team, and he would bolster a rotation that has questions about the depth of the rotation, but I would be surprised if the Reds pull this off.
I would too. And let's just kind of pause and remind ourselves what Johnny Cueto's 2022 looked like. Pitching for the Chicago White Sox, he went 8-10 if wins and losses matter to you, a 3.35 ERA in 24 starts, 158 innings pitched. He had a pretty good year, Jeff. I mean, he wasn't a world beater, but strikeouts per 9 innings at 5.8. His FIP was 3.79. He had a decent year. He showed that he's still in a position to get guys out and be a solid piece of a major league rotation. So that gives me pause. At the stage of Johnny Cueto's career that he's in, San Diego makes a whole lot more sense for Johnny Cueto to go try and get one more postseason opportunity before he has to hang it up than coming to Cincinnati. Now, if Johnny cares less about that, and I'm not sure that's true. If he cares less about that and is more interested in the feel good nostalgia, if the Reds are willing to pay him and bring him in for that, then great. But I think from Johnny Cueto's side of this, it just really makes more sense to go somewhere where he could be pitching in late October, trying to get himself a ring.
Yeah. I mean, if you're telling me there's a list of 3 teams, the Padres are on that list, and the other 2 teams are the Marlins and the Reds, I'm choosing the Padres all day. I mean, better weather for one, but also you're going to be in those meaningful battles. And I think that, excuse me, getting choked up thinking about this. But when it comes to like thinking about the Padres position compared to the Reds and the Marlins, like I don't think that the Marlins are going to be severely outbid by both the Reds and the Marlins. So you can take that off the table. And then you've got meaningful baseball that you're talking about there. And yes, everybody always says, well, Johnny Cueto still maintains a good relationship with the Reds, and the Reds are a team that players want to be here. They want to be in Cincinnati. But at the end of the day, if you're telling me that he's got a chance for another ring, I'd go for the other ring all day long. And look, Ken Rosenthal reporting this, there's few people. I think you could probably put him and Jeff Passan together and say, which one do you trust more? But those are the 2 most trustworthy guys when it comes to reporting baseball stuff. But I just don't think that the Reds leak information. It's like what you said, and I totally agree with it, is that the Reds just don't leak information on possible signings. We find out about them, and then it's like, boom, they're signed. It's not, we hear about this a week ahead of time, and then, oh, hey, it happens.
I mean, I remind you that, last year we were finding out about signings of this team because the beat writers were going into the locker room and seeing nameplates on lockers. So that's how the Reds communicate signings. So this for me, I think, is a little bit of bluster. But again, I believe absolutely somebody told Ken Rosenthal that the Reds are still in on this. You mentioned Passan, you mentioned Rosenthal. Those are the only 2 national media guys that I really pay a whole lot of attention to when it comes to these baseball rumors. If this was Heyman, we wouldn't even be talking about it. But it's Keith Law, we wouldn't even be talking about this. But and let's face it, Law wouldn't be talking about the Reds anyway. But it's just a fact of the matter that we're in the middle of the cold, dark days of winter. The Reds' hot stove is not even lukewarm. So for them to be linked here, it was at least worth spending a few minutes talking about it and maybe dispelling it a little bit, tempering expectation. I think that's probably a better way to put this.
Yes.
Let's not have everybody get all excited for something that we think is, probably not likely to happen.
And that's the important thing here. We're not saying we don't want Johnny Cueto to be a Red. We would love Johnny Cueto to be a Red. What we're saying is don't expect it. It would be a huge surprise because, look, Johnny Cueto fits amazingly on this team, and he would absolutely build this rotation up, something that needs – I mean, we've talked about this before. If we're going to lean heavily on the second year being good for Green, Lodolo, and Ashcraft and expecting all 3 of those things to happen, that's hope. That's not expectation. You want a veteran presence in there. I would just be very, very surprised if Johnny Cueto ends up being that guy.
And let's remember that the 5th guy in this rotation is probably going to be a rookie. So 3 second years and a rookie, you need somebody that's a little bit experienced to kind of just round that whole thing out. And while Cueto would go a long way in bolstering the Reds rotation, Jeff, not much attention has been paid to fixing this bullpen that just there's no other way to describe than it being a hot mess. Coming up, we are going to rate our confidence level in the arms that remain in the bullpen, carrying over from 2022 into the 2023 season. We'll tell you who you can bet on even. And speaking of betting on, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's podcast, BetOnline. You can find the latest in player development, team matchups, news, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find over at betonline.net. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information. They've got live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport around. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events. They've got the NFL, they've got the NBA, they've got hockey, they've got futures for Major League Baseball. They've also got MMA, boxing, golf, you name it, they have it. Head over there. You can get all of the information you need to make some informed wagering decisions. So head to betonline.net right now using your mobile device or computer to learn more. I had a pretty good football season thus far, Jeff. I know I've told you that I'm up. And I'm hoping that continues through the postseason because I made a couple wagers at the beginning of the year on those Bengals to win the AFC North. Hooray. I also made a little wager on the Bengals to win the Super Bowl. So let's hope both of those things happen and I get paid because it's all about me. No, I'm just kidding. BetOnline had you covered with that's right. Hooray. BetOnline has you covered. So head over there, betonline.net. BetOnline is where the game starts. Oh, and by the way, Ohio folks, sports betting is now legal in the state of Ohio. So if you want to be really informed about where to place your bets and where to make your wagers, download and subscribe the Locked On podcast, Locked On Bet. They have daily picks, they have analysis, they have all of the information you need to grow your bankroll like I grew my bankroll this year. That's the Locked On Bet podcast for all of your sports wagering information. All right, coming up tomorrow, we've got another edition of the live Aloha Friday Locked On Reds, where we take your questions and comments and put you in the driver's seat and talk about most things that you want to talk about. Had to filter a couple times because you guys are hilarious. But for the most part, we put you in the driver's seat. You can join that conversation on our YouTube channel. Bring your questions, bring your comments. Make sure you're on the YouTube feed. You got the subscribed and the notification bell clicked, so you get notified when we go live and you can participate in that Aloha Live Friday conversation. We have so much fun with that. All right, Jeff, we talked about a potential reunion with Johnny Cueto and what that would mean for the rotation. But what we haven't talked about this offseason at all are additions to the bullpen, and that's because there haven't been any. There's not single addition to the bullpen that's been made. So that really leaves us in a position where it looks like, at least on the surface of it right now, it could change when we get into spring training and other teams start making their cuts. But right now it looks like the Reds are rolling with what they got. And that puts us in a position of kind of having to rate how we feel about what they got. We'll start off easy. I'm gonna pitch you the softball. Get ready, get ready to flex, because the number one guy in this bullpen, the guy you are most confident in heading into 2023 is
Alexis Diaz.
There you go.
It's the very obvious pick because he has become one of the best relief pitchers in baseball. I feel comfortable saying that. In fact, you heard lots of rumors about how the Mets were trying to reunite him with his brother and trying to trade for him, and maybe the Reds were asking for too much, which good on them. They should be. Alexis Diaz has shown he has the stuff. He's got that amazing, electric, beautiful fastball coupled with a slider that absolutely just buckles batters' knees with how great it sweeps out of the zone. Beautiful pitches that he is able to locate all over the strike zone and out of the strike zone as well to really mess with hitters' eye levels and their swings and stuff like that. It's a very big no-brainer, and it's a huge reason why I believe this bullpen has a lot of upside, is because he leads it. He is the guy that is going to anchor it. Now, this bullpen has lots of question marks too. The upside's there, but there's definitely a pretty low floor because these guys we're going to talk about when it comes to confidence levels. Woo, yeah, not great. Now I'm not saying Alexis Diaz has a 10 out of 10 confidence rating, but I'd say 8 out of 10. I think where I'm at with him.
I think that's probably fair. I'm at a 7 or 8 only because I still think he has some things to learn. I still think that he has some room to grow. But I will say that I do believe that what we started to see out of him the second half of the season, and more towards the end of the season, leads me to believe he's going to be the guy. And I think he's going to be good at being the guy. I don't think it's going to be one of those situations. And we talk about this all the time, that relief pitchers are, they're just a whole different breed. And you just never know what you're going to get from year to year. But I don't believe that Alexis Diaz is going to suffer from that. I think he's going to come out, pick up right where he left off. He's going to continue to grow. He's going to continue to be good. And I agree. Maybe 7 to 8 out of 10, but that's the highest confidence rating that I have for anybody in the Reds bullpen heading into 2023.
Well, Steve, the Reds bullpen's like a box of chocolates.
Stop it.
You just never know what you're going to get. The rest of this bullpen, I don't even know that I'd put their confidence level above a 5. I think there's a couple of guys that I would put at a 5.
No,
but I think that's the highest.
I'm going to disagree with you. The next guy for me, if Alexis Diaz is the standard of this bullpen, the next guy for me is going to be Luis Cessa. I think that Luis Cessa is coming off of a season where he was asked to do a lot of things. He was asked to do a lot of things that were out of his wheelhouse. He performed admirably in that role. And I think if you put him back in this bullpen, let him focus on his 2 best pitches, the fact that, we've stretched him out a little bit and he can give you more than an inning at a time now. I'm confident at him at a 6, maybe even a 7 level to be the 7th, 8th inning guy in front of Alexis Diaz heading into 2023.
I don't know that I agree. I know that they stretched him out, and I like that they kind of added more to his arsenal by doing that. But before he was stretched out, he was pitching very bad out of the bullpen. I believe his homers per 9 was almost 2 as a relief pitcher. I think it was like 1.8. And I don't necessarily know, and I think that this falls under the relief pitchers are a fickle bunch, because coming into the year, we included him in the bullpen ace conversation. Him and Lucas Sims were kind of our 1A, 1B. I'm not there on Luis Cessa. I think that he's maybe a 5 or a 6. You could probably convince me he's a 6. I'm not going anywhere near a 7, but I think that if you're calling on Luis Cessa, you can maybe convince me that he's the second most reliable reliever of this bunch. However, the other guy, and this one's going to surprise you, the other guy that I think you would make an argument about this is Buck Farmer. I think Buck Farmer showed me with the strikeout rate and his ground ball rate last season, he is the second most reliable reliever of this bunch. And I'm saying that more based on health when you're comparing him to Lucas Sims, Tony Santillan, and TJ Antone. I think that the questions of health with those 3 guys lower my confidence level in. Now, if they show that they're healthy again, then we are talking about some guys we can put in the 6 and 7 and maybe even 8 range if TJ Antone returns to the form that he was pre-second Tommy John surgery. But you're asking a lot out of the health of that guy. So I look at Buck Farmer and Luis Cessa as the 2 competitors for the second most reliable, and I put Buck Farmer a little bit ahead of Luis Cessa.
So moving down this list now, there's a lot of question marks. You mentioned the guys with the health questions, TJ Antone being the biggest one. I'm interested to see how Lucas Sims rebounds coming off of his injuries, to see if he can be that guy again. I believe that he can, but only time is going to show us that. The rest of the guys on this list, some of them we're not even sure if they're going to be in this bullpen. They could be competing for a rotation spot depending on what happens. But we have Connor Overton in this bullpen. We have Justin Dunn in this bullpen. We have Fernando Cruz listed as being a potential guy in this bullpen, maybe as the last man to make the team, a la Alexis Diaz last year. So there's a lot of questions here. Of that bunch, I think that Fernando Cruz probably has the best opportunity to be an impactful bullpen arm, given what little bit we saw out of him, plus his minor league numbers. I think that at the end of the day, Connor Overton wants to be a starter. I think that Justin Dunn wants to be a starter, although I really feel like everything I've seen from him screams leave him in the bullpen.
I think by the end of the season, we'll see Justin Dunn in the bullpen. I think that the Reds will still begin this year, whether he is the fifth starter out of camp or he is a starter in Louisville for a little bit to kind of be like that, sixth guy that you can bring up in case of a spot start. I think that they're going to begin the year with him out of the rotation. If he continues to show what we saw last year, and that is something that you were first on, and I agree with you, is that it seems like his future is out of the bullpen, then I agree. But I don't think he starts the year in the bullpen. I think Connor Overton more than likely is kind of like your long relief type dude who, okay, the starter had a rough day, like say Hunter Green's fastball is just not working. He's giving up long balls. He's giving up walks. So you bring Overton in like the fifth inning to sort of be that gap between what the starter wasn't going to give you and between what you're going to ask the bullpen to do. I could see that being his most effective role. Mm-hmm. Fernando Cruz, I agree with you. I think Fernando Cruz is very intriguing. Now, small sample size last year, but he showed some good stuff. And this winter, he has continued that. I believe he's only given up 2 runs in the Mexican Winter League. So I think that you're looking at a dude who is definitely coming in with some momentum, as much as momentum can be had in baseball. It's not a huge thing in baseball, but he's coming in with a little bit of positive momentum behind him. And I'd be interested to see what he can do. And just kind of a final word on the injured guys, on the guys who are coming back from, as long as they're healthy, they're going to be in the bullpen. That doesn't mean that I'm going to, just because they're healthy on opening day, I'm going to increase their confidence level. Right now, all 3 of those guys are 5s for me, because Santillan and Sims and Antone have done it before, but I have a lot less confidence that they can continue that high level of performance moving forward.
There's another guy I want to get your thoughts on before we wrap up this segment, Jeff, because we haven't talked about him yet, and that's Reiver Sanmartin. We thought he was going to be a starter. It turned pretty quickly that was not going to be the case, but he found new life. He went down, he worked on things, he came up, and I thought was a valuable add to the bullpen in 2022. So moving into 2023, what type of role do you see for him? And then what's your confidence level in him? For me, I think he sits around that 5 to 6 confidence level right now. I think he needs to show me more to make me a little bit more confident, but he feels like a middle innings kind of guy right now to me.
This is interesting because normally I'm the one that's on the optimistic side. For him, I'm a little bit more cautious. I'd say cautiously optimistic. I give him a 4 or a 5 confidence level. I agree with you, middle innings type dude. I'm not going to give him, especially if everybody's healthy, I'm not going to give him a setup role right out of the gate. I think that he could definitely be valuable rolling up against other teams' left-handed hitters, making them turn over the lineup, bring some guys off the bench, that sort of deal. He was very inconsistent last year. It felt like, he was bad. They sent him down to AAA. They bring him back up. He's good. Then he slows down a little bit, and then they send him back down, bring him back up. It was one of those guys that was almost like you almost have to hit the reset button every so often to get him back going again. I do agree with you. I think I've seen the talent there with that lefty slider that he can just absolutely murder left-handed hitters with, but I'm not necessarily sure that I have a lot of confidence in him in being consistent with that slider. So I'd say 4 out of 5 or 4 to 5 out of 10, and maybe a 6th inning guy.
So there's a few more guys that we haven't touched on. Let's just run through them real quick. And if anybody jumps out at you, Ian Jabalt is going to compete to be a member of this bullpen. Daniel Duarte is going to compete to be a member of this bullpen. And Joe Kunal is going to compete to be a member of this bullpen. I think of those 3 guys, I'm probably, the highest on Joe Kunal, maybe. Daniel Duarte, I think, could show us something, and I don't know what to make of Ian Jabalt. I mean, he was all right. He's okay. He gives hope for people that are in our particular athletic condition to compete at the highest levels of Major League Baseball. I mean, if that guy can do it, maybe you and I can do it. I don't know. But I'm not super big on any of those guys, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think of the 3 of them, one of them makes the bullpen, and I think it's Joe Kunal. And Joe Kunal is a guy that he actually did pretty decently with his strikeout rate last year, but his problem's always been the walks. Can he limit the walks next year moving forward? I don't know. I think that of the 3, I want to see more from Joe Kunal. I would like to see a little bit more from Daniel Duarte because his season got cut short very quickly. I think he only had like 3 or 4 appearances last year before he got hurt and then we just never saw him again. But yeah, I think of those three guys, I don't have much confidence.
He went on the, is that guy still on this team list?
Yeah.
He was on that list over there.
Yeah. And when in September we took a look around, and we're just like, how many guys have played for this team this year? Oh yeah, remember Daniel Duarte? He was one of them. Yeah, he was one of them. But yeah, I think I put a confidence level in Joe Kunal at 4, and that's the highest of those 3.
Yep, I agree. Well, I think the big takeaway, Jeff, is there's some potential. There could be a lot of upside. Yep. There could be a lot of downside. There's a lot of question marks. That's the big takeaway on the Reds bullpen heading into 2023.
100%, Steve. But, you know, a familiar face has shown up in a new place, and it's in division. Coming up, we're going to tell you how worried we are about Tucker Barnhart being behind the plate in Chicago. That's Tucker Barnhart as a Chicago Cub. That's coming up in just a moment. Before we get into that, though, wanted to let you know you can follow the podcast on all platforms, including right here on YouTube. If this is your first time, thank you so much for watching us here. Make sure you click that subscribe button and you click the bell to get notified whenever we go live and we have new content for you, like we're going to go live tomorrow on the Aloha edition of the Locked On Reds podcast. Also, make sure you're following us on Twitter. You can follow Steve at S. Offenbaker with 2 Fs. You can follow me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs, and you can follow the show at Locked On Reds. And there was one other thing, and we were talking about the bullpen there for a minute, but one other thing I wanted to note, I did see that Art Warren got signed to a minor league contract by the New York Yankees, so we will not be seeing him back. I was wondering if maybe he was going to be a guy that the Reds could bring back on a minor league deal. I know they did that with Jared Solomon. They did that with, I think, Joe Kunal, but there was a couple of different folks that they've done that with, and Art Warren will not be one of them. Steve, though,
he's Stacy's problem now.
Yeah, Stacy's gonna have some. He showed potential, man. He really did. He just never got a chance to really dive into it and really develop for the Reds. You know, one guy that we know quite well, Tucker Barnhart, didn't have that great of a year in Detroit. Found himself a free agent, and he is now a Chicago Cub. Are we worried about this?
Well, let's set this up. He signed a 2-year deal with the Chicago Cubs for $6.5 million. He's coming off a season in Detroit where he was really not that great, Jeff. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, he was better than everybody not named Stevenson that caught for the Reds, but his OPS plus for the Detroit Tigers was 64. Now, instead of going out and getting him, the Reds signed Curt Casali. They signed Casali to a 1-year deal with a team option, 1 year, $2.5 million, a $750,000 buyout if they don't want to pay him the second year, which would also be at $2.5 million. So if they don't pick up his option, he ends up costing the same thing that Tucker cost the Cubs this season. He's going to cost the Reds. The difference being Curt Casali had himself a nice little season, splitting time between the San Francisco Giants and the Cincinnati Reds West, the Seattle Mariners. Curt Casali put up an 86 OPS plus combined playing for those two teams. So about 20% better than the season that Tucker Barnhart had for the Tigers. You know, Tucker has always kind of had the edge defensively when you compare him to Curt Casali. But I think if we're talking about the value that the Reds are going to get in the dollars that they're spending, I like the fact that they signed Curt Casali. You know, a reunion with Tucker might have been nice, but, you know, it's starting to look like Tucker's best days of baseball might be behind him. And I don't know that the difference in defense would make up for that 20% offensive production. So for me, I like the Curt Casali signing. You know, it's going to be a little weird seeing Tucker in division playing for the Cubs. At least it's not the Cardinals, I guess. But
could be worse.
I don't know. You know, I don't think Tucker moves the needle that much. I don't think that he is that would have been that big of a difference maker. I like what the Reds have done with the, I guess, catcher's room. I don't know how you do that in baseball. In football, we talk about the receivers room, the quarterback room, like the catcher's room. What are we doing?
Maybe it's the
I like
dugout.
the group, the catcher's group. I don't know, whatever we're calling that. I like the upgrades that the Reds have made to that position between 22 and 23. And I don't think Tucker's that big of a difference maker.
No, and I honestly think that at the end of the season now, Tucker may very well get more playing time than Curt Casali, but I think the rate stats, the batting average, the on base, the slugging, is probably going to be better. You don't think he's going to get as much?
Okay, I'm good for at least one hot take every day, right? My hot take is this. I think Curt Casali is going to get probably an equal amount of playing time. Now, he might not get the same number of starts, but right. I think the Reds are setting up a future where Tyler Stevenson moves around quite a bit. And, we could see games where Tyler might start out behind the plate and finish the game at first base. We would see Curt Casali in those situations. They brought in Curt Casali to be catcher 1B. He's not the backup. He's the flexibility to keep Tyler Stevenson's bat in the lineup for the 150 games I want it in the lineup. So right. I think Curt Casali, if healthy, is going to get a ton of playing time.
But I do agree with you. I look at this and I say I would rather have Curt Casali over Tucker Barnhart. And there was also reports that, the Reds did reach out to Tucker Barnhart earlier on this offseason, but that he was still looking for a 1A gig. He was still looking to be the guy. And I find it interesting because the Cubs obviously lost Wilson Contreras. He goes to St. Louis. The Cubs were in on a number of different catchers and just never got any of them. And then now they have Tucker Barnhart. I wonder almost if they've got a little bit of, we've got a top prospect that's close to coming up. I don't know the Cubs farm system to tell you who that is, but maybe there's something there. I look at where Tucker is in his career and I look at where Curt is in their career, and I think they're about the same guy. And I think that the Reds did well to not hamstring them to a guy who's still looking to be the guy of the catcher's room, catcher's dugout. I'm going to say catcher's dugout. But I think that they've also got him a little bit cheaper too, which is it's nice for their roster building. I'm not necessarily advocating for the Reds to go cheap on stuff here, but I think that overall, when you compare these two guys, I think Curt Casali was the better get.
If you're still with us on the YouTube feeds or on Twitter, comment with what we should call this thing. Is it the catcher's? What is it? I don't like catcher's dugout. Catcher's room feels very football-ish. We need something, guys. You our listeners never let me down. So in the comments, tell me what we're going to call this thing. We need to come up with it. But
the catching battery.
But that's the pitcher. That involves the pitcher. So yeah, I trust our viewers. They're going to come up with something for us. Listen, I think the Reds are getting better value for the money that they're spending out of what is going to be catcher 1B. I wish Tucker well, just not when he's playing the Reds. And I think that is probably where we will wrap it up for today. Thanks for making this edition of the Locked On Reds podcast your first listen. Now go make your second listen, the Locked On MLB Prospects podcast with Lindsey Crosby. We're back to talking about Lindsey. We love Lindsey. Lindsey knows his stuff. He is a prospect encyclopedia. He's going to go deep into the major league, minor league systems and tell you about the stars of tomorrow today. I think that was a Disney ride. I'm not sure. The MLB prospect. Oh God, I've screwed this up. The MLB Prospects podcast, just like Locked On Reds, is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Go and give it a listen. Listen, Jeff, I clearly can't read today. I don't know what's going on with Lindsey's podcast, but tell people what's going on with this one.
Well, make sure that you check us out tomorrow in our live Aloha edition. Make sure you're active in the comment section. We'll be taking questions. We'll be taking comments. We might have to get Lindsey on here soon to talk about the Reds farm system and talk about what the Reds are going to do with their draft pick coming up next year. But that'll come up here soon in the offseason. But as we go through the offseason, we will be all over the waiver wire. We will be all over the moves that the Reds make because they are Locked On Reds every single day.